Hello, loves. Today we're going to be talking about resizing your images specifically for Etsy, but really when we get into all of this, you're going to be able to do it for any platform. It's just knowing what their actual requirements are. So I decided to do this training live today because I wanted you to be able to interact and ask questions as I'm teaching it, just to make sure that we're covering all the bases. Sometimes things need to be taught in a different way so that people can understand them. So if you're here, please ask questions. I do have my phone up over here where I am checking comments. So ask questions as we go. The first thing we're going to, well, let me talk about what we're going to do here. So this video probably will get to be a little long, but the great thing about that is we're going to cover everything when it comes to image resizing. And we're going to talk about some just terminology that's used in the industry that may be confusing or overwhelming. And we're going to talk about this different steps of resizing, because a lot of people are under the impression that you resize your image and you're just doing one thing to it. And really it's a 3-step process. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about why you should be resizing your images, why it matters, what the point of it is, and what it actually means to do that. And then we're going to talk about the 3-step process, which the first step is adjusting your aspect ratio, which is going to be cropping. The second step is actually adjusting your image size, so your pixel dimensions. And the third step is going to be reducing your file size so you can optimize those images for the web. Okay, so why do we even resize our images? So every platform, and when we get into like the programming and developers type stuff, I will be fully transparent. That is not my realm, but every platform basically has their own programming developing where they choose how the images are displayed. And that's basically what resizing is you want to make sure that you have control over how your image is displayed. And that's why you need to go per the recommendations. So the first thing, when you go to Etsy search, you're going to see all these different images, right? If you notice, they are all the same shape. Okay, that is what we call the aspect ratio. So the aspect ratio is the proportion of width to height. So when you go back to like old school, like math, it is determining the shape. So all the devices are different though. And that's kind of the problem. That's where I think a lot of people get confused about, okay, so like my cell phone has a certain aspect ratio, right? So it's a certain shape. My computer screen is a certain shape. My television is a certain shape. And these shapes have different proportions. And so when you take an image on a platform like Etsy, they have to be able to account for the different aspect ratios of these devices. Okay, so we're talking about display, how it's displayed. Where was that one? There was a picture here. Okay, so this one right here, you can tell that it's getting cut off, right? So this person, you click into their listing, this person did not go by Etsy's recommendations. So this is the image that they uploaded. And as you can tell, the actual thumbnail is cutting the image off. So if we go back to the search, this is how it looks here. So when you don't adjust your aspect ratio, again, 3 parts, you don't adjust your aspect ratio for the platform's recommendations, you have the potential chance of your image not looking the way that you created it. Parts that will get cut off. There's a lot of different things that can happen. So the point in adjusting your aspect ratio and adjusting your image sizing, all of that is so that you can keep control over your images so they display the way that you want them to. While Etsy recommends a 4:3 aspect ratio. So let's pull that in and let's talk about that quick. Okay, so down here for the thumbnail image, Etsy recommends a 4:3 aspect ratio. Okay. But I'm going to show you real quick here how you can go about testing to see how things are displayed. And so on my end, I'm an iPhone user, I'm a Mac user. I do have access to a PC, but I use Mac every day. I do not have an Android. So I had someone who had watched one of my YouTube videos. She's like, mine is displayed as a 4:3 on Android. So we did a little testing and came to the conclusion that on Etsy's main search page. So here, images are, and also like if you click into their actual shop, and I'll show you how to test this in a second. All of these here are actually displayed as a 5:4 aspect ratio on iOS, so for iPhone and Mac, and on PC, but they display as a 4:3 on Android. Okay, so let's first talk about, we showed you how it can get cut off, right? So let me take you into Photoshop here, and I want to show you how your images will look if you on Etsy if you are not cropping them and changing the aspect ratio. So right now we're still kind of talking about why it's important, and then we'll get more into aspect ratio here in a second. So this right here is a 4:3 aspect ratio. And this is essentially, if you have an iPhone, this is how your image is going to come out of the iPhone. They are a 4:3 aspect ratio when shooting on iPhone. On Samsung devices, you have the option to choose different aspect ratios. But 4:3 is what's going to come out of an iPhone. So if you're looking at this may be on Android, as I said when we tested it, this would be how it would display for the thumbnail image. Now, if you are on an iPhone, and I want you to see that the difference here isn't significant. So down here, I changed to a 5:4. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull that. Okay. Now what Etsy's going to do is they're going to pull from the center. So we need to make this as equal as possible. Now, if you were to upload a 4:3 aspect ratio to Etsy, this right here is what your image thumbnail, so the lighter part, is going to look like on iOS, Mac, and PC. Okay, so it's going to cut off this tiny portion of the image. Not a huge deal, right? Not a big deal. And that's the thing I want you guys to understand is, well, Etsy has specific recommendations. You can upload whatever size you want. You just need to understand the effects of that happening. Okay, so if you were to crop, or Etsy were to display this as a 5:4, this is what you're going to be losing if you actually upload a 4:3 aspect ratio. Now, let's say I wanted to show you the square. Let me downsize this here quick. So take this 4:3 and we're going to change it to a square. This is going to end up cutting out some of my picture. I'm sorry, guys. I thought I had put one there for you, and I don't want to take the time to move it over. So let's just say that's what our image is, and that's what we uploaded to Etsy. Well, again, Etsy is going to display, we'll start with 5:4, the image. So if I take this and I do a 5:4 landscape and I center it, because Etsy's going to go from the center out, it looks pretty centered there. That is what's going to be cropped out on search and in my shop when it shows the main thumbnail image. Now, where it does become a huge deal is when we're looking at portrait. So when we're doing a portrait, so initially you pick up your phones and you hold them like this, right? Okay, that's just naturally how we do it. So a lot of you don't think to shoot in landscape. My recommendation is to always shoot in landscape, because when you can shoot in landscape, you can crop to a vertical portrait. It's just very versatile. Whereas this image, so Etsy prefers 5:4 or 4:3 landscape. So we're looking at a vertical image here. This is not landscape. Landscape is going to be this way. This would be considered vertical or portrait. This is landscape. Okay, so when we go and we create our 5:4, and again, Etsy's going to crop from the center out. That is how our image is going to look in search with the thumbnail. So if you're viewing on an Android, it's going to be 4:3. And if we're cropping from the center out, which is what Etsy's going to do, that's how much of your image is going to get cut out on the thumbnail. So you noticed here, her image was cut out. And when we click into her listing, your images inside of your listing will display as you upload them. So if you want to, so if your product is a vertical product or it looks better shot vertically, what you can do is do a horizontal for your main thumbnail image, and then you can do vertical images here, because the only thing that's going to be affected is that first thumbnail image when it comes to Etsy resizing the image. So my suggestion to you is I would either use square, 5.4 or 4.3. Okay. Those all are pretty, it's going to depend on your product, because you want to make sure that you aren't cutting your product out. So any of those. So if you're like a total Instagram user and you're changing all your images to square, or maybe you're also on Amazon or Shopify and all of your images are square to upload them, you can keep them square for Etsy. Just understand that first thumbnail image. Just remember that, let's just do a 5.4. You're going to end up losing a little of the top and the bottom when Etsy goes to resize it for the thumbnail image. So just keep that in mind. All your other images, so the other 9 images that are in your listing, are going to just show up as square. It's the first thumbnail image that's affected. So let's talk about how we test this. So every year, it's the beginning of a new year, right? We just moved into 2022. So I actually kind of test, I think about 3 times a year. I come on and just test, even if Etsy hasn't announced anything, because I will say Etsy is even contradictory in their information. Okay, so let's talk about how to test this. So what we're going to do is you can go, and this can happen on any display. You just take a screenshot, basically. So you pull up Etsy, and we're just going to do it on Mac for right now. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to do a screenshot of this. Okay. And then we're going to pull it into Photoshop. And I'm going to zoom in here so that we can grab one of these. Get a little closer here. Go back to my crop tool. Okay, so that is displaying as a 5:4 aspect ratio. Now watch, I want you guys to see something, because the 4:3 and 5:4 are hard to tell. So if we change that to a square, I was going to do this crap again. Let me zoom back out. I don't like that. So let's bring it down smaller. So we know it's not a square, because if we put that there, look how much of that's getting cut out. So if we go in and do a 4:3 aspect ratio, which again, don't really pull any of these. Smaller. Tell me, line up the sides, look at the bottom portion that's getting cut out there. We're going to move this down, move it down so we can see the top more. Okay, so it's not a 4:3 aspect ratio. But if I were to take a screenshot on an Android, or at least when I tested this in November, if you take a screenshot on Android, it does show as a 4:3. Okay, so that's how you go about testing. How you can use any website. You can pull up any website, and if you grab an image and go in, and this is just a crop tool that I'm using. I'm cropping it to see what it's cropping to. It'll show you what the display is. Okay, so that's how you determine. So at this point, that's how I know that on Mac, Etsy is still displaying their thumbnail image as a 5:4 aspect ratio. So let's get into, so that's kind of why. We're talking about why here. That was the why. The why is to make sure you remain in control over how your images are displayed, making sure that your product's not actually getting cut out. Because when you look at, the product that is being cut out, it doesn't look super professional. There isn't, it doesn't show the whole product. You might be missing detail. So you just want to make sure that you are keeping control over that. Okay, the next part we're going to go into is actually resizing. So first step one is aspect ratio. And aspect ratio is basically, we talked about shapes, right? So it's the shape of an object and the portion of width to height, or the ratio of width to height, however you want to say it. So if we look at a 4:3 aspect ratio, we're talking, when we say 4:3, and this, I think this is something that gets a little confusing too, because when you talk 4:3, it's width times height. So that would be in landscape, right? The bottom, the width, the bottom is longer than the top. So for every 4 units on the bottom, there's 3 units on the top. And what it has to do with aspect ratio has to do with how it's actually displayed. We talked about that, right? Basically, like I told you, I'm not a developer, I'm not a programmer, but how they account for different devices having different displays is it's called responsive images. So that's basically what's happening when you see it displayed on iPhone and Mac and PC as a 5:4. It's displaying as a 4:3 on Android, because Android's aspect ratio is different and it's accounting for it separately. So it's called responsive images, and it's all about programming and developing and how they can make images look correct on different devices, and they may have different display settings. So the aspect ratio is just that. It's a ratio, and it's independent of the actual image size or the pixel dimensions. And I think that's where we get into a lot of confusion. We're getting into like what pixels are. Is your image is made up of tiny little pixels, and they're squares, and they actually record, they're the data. Okay, so the information in your image. The more pixels you have, the sharper your image is. But the problem that we get into when it comes to online and the web is the more pixels there is, the more data and information there is, which means the larger the file size is, which is step 3, file size. And what that means is you will have slower loading times if your file size is larger. It takes up more space. It's going to take more to actually load the image. And that's where we run into problems. So when it comes to your online business, if you are solely selling online and you're not being featured in media or anything like that, where you have to do any kind of print, your goal is actually going to be to reduce your pixel dimensions, so the number of pixels in your image, and reduce that file size so that you can optimize your images for the web. So while you have a 3-step process here, they all kind of correlate, and we're going to kind of get into that here in a second. So while your aspect ratio can be a 4:3, the actual pixels within that can completely change. Okay, so let's go back to this image here. Well, let's do the original. Okay, so this is the original that I took. It's all crooked. This original, if we look at, I want to talk about this too quick. If we look at the metadata, which the metadata, you just right click and get the info. Metadata is basically the information about the image, and it travels with the image. So if you transfer it, if you share it, anything, it's traveling along with it. Any changes you make to the image, the metadata will change. So right now, when we look at this, our pixel dimensions, so this is our image size. Okay. Now what you won't see on here is the aspect ratio. We know we can account for the aspect ratio based on the pixel dimensions. And let me show you that too. There's an aspect ratio calculator. So if I say that I want a 5:4, but this is where I think some of you might get confused. So Etsy tells you 4:3. So let's just put that in. That's what they're saying, 4:3. Okay, but only thing they tell you is that they recommend 2,000 pixels with a max of 3,000. Okay, so when you set your aspect ratio to a 4:3, most software programs, editing programs, are only going to have you put in this one number. Okay, they're going to have you put in 2,000. Well, because you've set that aspect ratio to a 4:3, they know that for every 4 units, there's going to be 3 units here. So 2000 divided by 4 is what? 500, right? So then 500 times 3 is 1500. So this aspect ratio automatically calculates the pixel dimensions by you just choosing the pixel width. Does that make sense? Give me a thumbs up. That makes sense to you. Remember how I told you it's a 3-step process, but they all correlate and they all have an effect on each other. Each process has an effect on each other. Okay. So, and I will get into this when I show you. So at the end of this, I'm going to show you how to resize in multiple programs. So just pay attention to that here. So 4:3 aspect ratio, we're just going to pick 2000. So because of the aspect ratio, it's automatically going to set the height. Okay. That's very important there. Let's go into, we talked about the original image. So this is the pixel dimension. So the image size that comes from the iPhone. It's 4032 by 3024, which if you want to get the total amount of pixels in the image, you would multiply them. So 4032 times 3024. So that is a 12 megapixel camera. It produces an image size of 4032 by 3024. So what I want to show you here, let me go back into Photoshop and go back to this original. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to go with the 4:3 and we're going to crop this image to a 4:3 aspect ratio. Okay, this is how I shot it from the thing, from the camera, and I want to decrease so that I am actually framing my image properly to cut out the sides. I just want the backdrop and there and all of that. So initially when I'm cropping, I'm choosing the proper aspect ratio. And then what's going to happen, and this is where that correlation comes in. But if I'm cropping out all of this back here, those are all pixels that I am removing from my image. And I specifically chose this image to show you because I need to remove a lot of pixels, okay? Because to frame my image properly, I need to remove a lot of pixels, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because we're going to be reducing the number of pixels to optimize for the web, but you want to always try to frame your image as good as possible. So if we check mark this, and I know it's crooked, don't pay attention to that. It's not the point of this video. And we go ahead and we save it. Say original cropped. Then we're going to check the metadata on this one we just saved. So if you notice, my pixels were already reduced because we cropped them out. So cropping alone, changing the aspect ratio and cropping alone will remove pixels from your image, removing data, which in turn will also reduce the file size. So the other way, so right now I went ahead and cropped this the way I wanted to. Let me just go back to this one here. I cropped this one the way I wanted to. Let's look at this image originally. Info. This image here is a 2731 by 2049. So that would be fine for Etsy. The max is 3000 width. Okay, so that would be fine, but Etsy actually recommends 2000. Their max is 3000. So if we wanted to resize this image to 2000, what we would do is go into, I'm going to show you on multiple programs, but I'll show you here quick. And this is Photoshop Elements. So this is, you don't want to pay for like the monthly Adobe program, like if you don't use it enough. You can purchase elements, and it's still a purchasable software, and just use elements. So we're going to resize the image size, and this is our width, and this is our height of our pixels. And we'll get into this stuff down here in a minute. I want to constrain our proportions because we already did the aspect ratio the way we wanted to. Okay, so if we change this to 2000, it's going to automatically change the height because we've constrained our proportions, meaning we want to keep the aspect ratio of 4:3. Those proportions, we want to keep them as a 4:3. If you undo the constraints, like I can change this to anything, but what that's going to do, if you watch, it's going to crop my image and make it look funny. Okay, and that's another reason we do the aspect ratio first and then go in. Now, if you choose not to do the aspect ratio first, you can go right into image size. So if I go back to that aspect ratio calculator, and I want to change this, let's just do a 5:4. And I want the pixels to be 2000. So I know 5:4 ratio proportion, if I'm just going to change the width, if the aspect ratio is already set to a 5:4 and I just want to change the width, it'll automatically change here if I constrain proportions. If I choose not to constrain the proportions and I decide to do 2000 by 1600, which is really a 5:4 aspect ratio, even though this is cropped to a 4:3. Okay, it'll go ahead and change that for me. Okay, so you can do that, but in some software, I'll show you in some softwares, you are only going to be able to choose the width, and that's why you have to set the aspect ratio first. Okay. And then in other softwares, this is where it gets confusing, because in other softwares like Canva, you don't have an option to set the aspect ratio. You have to be able to choose the pixel dimensions, and that's where like the pixel or the aspect ratio calculator comes in handy. So it really is just going to depend on what software you're using. And I'm going to show you a few here in a minute. Yes, so aspect ratio is just cropping. So if you go to this crop tool here, okay, you would set it in here under custom, and then you can pull it however you want, and you can make it smaller if you want, and that those proportions, the ratio stays the same. Like if I want to just these elements peeking in. Hopefully that answers your question there, Heather. Okay, so yes, the first step, adjusting your aspect ratio, is going to be in cropping. Let's kind of recap here. You want to resize your images for every platform that you're using so that your images actually get displayed the way that you created them. You want to keep control over them. So you want to make sure they're being displayed properly. That's why you need to adhere to the recommendations of each platform. When it comes to resizing, it also has to do with, so if you were to, some like Etsy will not allow you to upload a file size. So image file size that's larger than 1 megabyte, which we're about to get into. So if that file size is larger than that, it may not load into the platform. You want other platforms, they will compress the image and resize it for you. And you really don't want them to do that because they don't understand what it is that you're trying to show. If you have too many pixels or too large of a file size and they compress it, it can become very grainy and like pixelated, even if you have a lot of pixels to begin with. Okay, so you just want, the biggest thing is you want to keep control. So you want to control how your image is displayed. So you need to be resizing your images. And to do that, first step is to crop your image to the proper aspect ratio. With Etsy specifically, I think that it's fine to use either a square, a 4:3, or a 5:4. Just make sure if you're using a square is going to crop the most out on the top and bottom. So make sure the very top and bottom of your image does not have anything important in it. And this is something that you can test yourself. If square is the best option for you because you also sell on Amazon and they're a square ratio, and you also use Instagram and they're a square ratio, and it's easiest just for you to have square images, then just test your images and make sure you're leaving, when you frame your image, when you crop your image, make sure you're leaving enough negative space around the edge for that first thumbnail image to cut the top and the bottom off. When you go into a program to crop, so you're cropping out part of the thing, you are, wherever you take out of that image, you are removing those pixels. So by cropping, you're automatically reducing pixels, which means you're automatically reducing the image size. The image size, when you reduce the actual pixels in the image, because pixels are the detail, it's the information, you're automatically reducing the file size as well. And the file size is the next thing we're going to get into. Okay, if you're in Photoshop, you're going to go to Save for the Web. Okay, right now it's showing the original picture and then it's having us save it as a GIF. We don't want to do that. So we're going to go over here and change that to a JPEG. And this is where we changed it to a 60% quality reduction. And it's showing a 407.6 kilobyte file size. Okay, sorry about that. If you change it to very high, that's an 80% quality reduction, and it's at an 833.6. We got some questions here. Okay, I'm going to answer these questions, and if anybody has any other questions, you can type them into the comments. Sorry about that, Heather. Okay, so I had asked in the group the other day if anybody had questions about resizing, so I'm just going to kind of go over these. First question is the rectangle ratio often mentioned for Etsy better than the square that I use on my other platforms. Why? Okay, that should have been answered at this point. Etsy does recommend landscape because that first thumbnail image is landscape. But if you choose to use square because you're using it on all other platforms, that's perfectly fine. Within your listing images, all of your images within your actual listing will show as a square. But in search and on your main homepage of your shop, they will show up as a 4:3 or 5:4 aspect ratio, depending on what type of display is being used. And it will crop from the top to bottom. So let me reiterate that here and just show that quick again. So if you upload this square image, and Etsy is going to crop it to a 5:4 for Mac, iPhone, and PC. They're going to crop from the center. So that's what your image is going to look like. So you just want to make sure, and that's fine. That isn't necessarily how I originally framed it, but it's fine. The image is, the product is still center. The product is still showing. This is the product. The product is still showing in full. You're still good to go. Okay, so that's how it's going to crop. Same thing with 4:3. So down, center. Okay, that's what it's going to look like. So you have to be really careful when you're taking your pictures, and then when you're cropping them. If you're going to crop to a square, you need to make sure what we call is negative space. You want to leave negative space on the top and bottom so that your product is not getting cut out. And that's basically, negative space is empty space. Okay. So that answers that question. Next question. For me, it's hard to find out what the ideal dimensions are. Each platform seems to have its own requirements. Yes, it does. And I could spend ages making, for example, a Facebook banner for it to just be in the wrong proportions. So if we go out and search, okay, this is what it says. So I'm doing this example because I want you guys to see that sometimes you don't get all the information. So what you could do in this situation, it says 851 pixels by 313 pixels. Okay, so it didn't give us an aspect ratio. Let me just show you what I would do in Canva in this situation. So this is a situation where I would use Canva. And I personally don't use Canva to edit my images. I use Canva to create a lot of like PDF documents, to create graphics, all that kind of stuff. But what you can do is you can do a custom size. So our custom size is going to be the 851 by 315. Okay, that's the banner. And the reason I say this is a lot of times people don't just put an image in their banner. Like they actually make a graphic out of it. So if this is our image size for the banner, that's what we're going to put in there. And then you can do, like if I were to bring this image in, okay, I could, you know, if I were to actually make it like that, that's how it would end up kind of looking. Okay. Or you could do something like that, and then you can add text over it, or this could just be 4 images that you would have to then figure out. So really it's just going in and searching. And then this is to me, when it comes to like creating banners or like, especially for Etsy, it's the same concept. Now I do have a guide I can share with you guys, but it has all the image requirements, not all of them for Facebook, because there is a lot, but I will go through this and make sure it's still the same. And then I'll give you guys the link for you to snag this guide, because it has all the main platforms on it. So that could be an easy go-to. If it's not on there, then all you have to do is Google it. And like I said, sometimes when you Google, especially these really odd, like that's a really odd aspect ratio, to a point where like if I put it into an aspect ratio calculator, it's not giving me anything that's like common in the sense of it being like 4:3 is very common, 5:4 is very common, 16:9 is very common. If you're creating an image. So like here, I was creating a video for Style & Co. with this image because these are their backdrops. I had to go in and I had to create a 16:9 image to put at the end of their video to show how the image turned out using their setup. If I would have put this, well, let me show you. If I would have put my original 4:3 in, say I would have uploaded that 4:3 into my video that I was doing for Style & Co., this would have been black. Like it wouldn't have taken up the whole frame because the video was done in a 16:9 aspect ratio. So the rest of this just would have been black. So that's why I wanted to make sure I re-cropped and resized to a 16:9 aspect ratio. So you'll hear resize a lot. You'll hear crop, you'll hear image size, you'll hear file size, like a lot of different terminology being thrown around. So it's very important to make sure you understand what they're talking about. Okay, next question. I got one more, and this is actually quite a big one, and this is a more advanced question. That's why I saved it for last. So how does the ratio, pixels, resolution, and PPI all connect? Okay, so we already talked about the ratios, right? And setting the aspect ratio allows your pixel dimensions to automatically be calculated. So you just have to put in the width, and the height is automatically calculated based on your aspect ratio. Okay, now resolution, and this is a topic that the word's thrown around a lot, and a lot of people don't fully understand the meaning, but resolution is a measure of output. So basically how the image, the pixels will be displayed, and that's where PPI comes in. So let me go here. Right down here is where we're talking resolution. Now you will see, and even Etsy does it, and it's not really accurate. So as you see, I pulled this image up, right, and it says 72. Kind of just like a 72. This is your PPI, which really, see, pixels per inch. So PPI, pixels per inch, 72, 2000 with a resolution of 72 PPI. This right here is completely irrelevant. And I think it stinks for people because you'll see a lot of people talk about 72 PPI. Resolution is a measure of output. So an actual image does not have PPI. It's actually the display that has PPI, or the printer that has PPI, which is really DPI. And so it's a measure of output. This concept, PPI, resolution, has no relevance to you unless you end up doing like media for like some kind of print media. Like if you're being featured in a magazine that's actually printed, you will have somebody ask you for potentially like a high quality or high resolution image, which is considered 300 PPI, in a 5x7. Now, what that means is that you have to have enough pixels to print that image or display that image in a 5x7 proportion, so aspect ratio, with a 300 PPI resolution. So if we are, and this is what I want you, we don't want resampling on. If we change this to 300 pixels per inch, and that just basically means that it'll take the total pixels in your image and it'll put 300 of them per inch of however it's being displayed or printed. This image right here, so the actual pixel dimensions that you have in this image can be printed at a 9x5 as a high resolution, meaning very sharp. So if you have like a media person who says, I need 5x7, a high resolution of 300 PPI, this meets that requirement. Okay, so I don't really want to get too much into this because it isn't super relevant. The only thing that I think is really relevant about it is just the simple fact that you hear the term being thrown around a lot. Like there's relevancy in it because it's inside of Etsy's recommendations. But like I said, if we go in and we pull up to resize this image, it automatically says 72 PPI. Like it's just not relevant. A lot of, when I go back and I research this, a lot of the research stems from, I guess, Apple's first like computer display had 72 PPI. And so that's why it's kind of considered like the web number. But like our smartphones, I think I don't know the exact number, but our, like my iPhone, it has like 400 and something PPI. So it's the actual display that's going to account for how the image is displayed on the display based on the amount of pixels that are in there. So resolution is a measure of output. So that's just something to keep in mind. I think so the next portion of the question says, what does 4.8 PM as size mean? I think that was written incorrectly. 4.8 megapixels, I think is what it's supposed to say. I think it's supposed to say MP. And that just means the total number of pixels that you have in an image. So that's actually like 4,800,000 or something. When a photo is 1668 by 1668, what does that mean? Okay, so what that means, so the proportions are the same, right? 1668 by 1668. That means that it's a square. So a 1:1 aspect ratio, it's a square aspect ratio. So this has been cropped to a square. The pixel dimensions, so the actual image size is 1668 by 1668. And if we were to times those, 1668 times 1668, that would give us our total number of pixels in the image, which is 2,782,224. So this image almost has 3 megapixels in it. No information on file size. The file size will be smaller because the pixel dimensions, the image size is smaller. Okay, hopefully that answers your question. And then the next question on this one is, why is it that I have a photo that's 450 by 600 pixels and it looks good, but I get a message from Etsy saying listings look best with photos at least 2,000 pixels wide? So this can get a little complicated as well. So it depends on how you're viewing it. Depends on what kind of display you're viewing. Yes, an image it's 450 by 600 pixels. That is a very small image size as far as pixel dimensions go, and it will look fine on a smartphone. The display is small, right? But if you take that image and you put it on, let's say computer display, so a computer screen. And somebody is using their computer and they go to use the zoom feature, which is going to take up a majority of that space, right? Then your image is going to take up the whole screen and it's going to be very pixelated. Okay. So it's for zoom reasons. So the reason, I think it was back in 2017 when Etsy's recommendation went from 1,500 to 3,000. Well, around that time, that is also when like 4K displays, Ultra HD displays became very common. Higher resolution displays, meaning you need more pixels so that your images can look sharper. So it's not an issue when it's being viewed on an iPhone, or maybe not even an issue when it's being viewed on a tablet. But if you start to use the zoom feature on, a desktop, or if some people are using like larger displays like their TVs to do work or whatever that is, or like if you're creating that image for a video on YouTube, you're going to want more pixels, because that higher resolution TV, more PPI, more pixels per inch, is going to need more pixels, in an image to display it sharp. Hopefully that makes sense. And that's why some people, so when Etsy says a max, but they recommend 200, and the max of 3,000, but they recommend 2,000. I'm sorry, I said that completely wrong. The max of 3,000 is kind of anticipating, those higher resolution screens. But when you get up to 3,000 pixels, you have to find this balance, because if you're at 3,000 pixels, your file size is going to be larger because you have more pixels inside the image, which means you have more data, more information, and it's going to create a larger file size. So if you take that 3,000 pixel image and at a 5:4 aspect ratio, I think it's 1,600. I don't know where my aspect ratio calculator went now. Either way, I'll stop sharing this now. At a 5:4, 3,000, I think it's 1,600, if I'm remembering correctly. But either way, say your pixel dimensions are 3,000 by 1,600. File size is going to be larger. And if you have to do like a 40% quality reduction to get that file size down to meet recommendations, that's going to be a problem, because you're removing a lot of data, which can also in turn make your image pixelated. So there's a lot of different things there that could be happening. Okay, I'm going to show you how to resize your images. I'm going to pull up an image and show you how to meet the recommendations for Etsy, because again, they're going to be different on different devices. If there's anybody in here specifically who wants to see a specific editing program, drop it in the comments. But right now I'm going to show you, pretty much showed you in Photoshop. So if I were to pull this image from my phone and I edited it, I already cropped it and framed it the way I wanted to. It's at a 4:3 aspect ratio. That's fine for Etsy. Remember, we talked about using a 4:3, 5:4. Last resort, using a square, making sure you're leaving negative space on top and bottom, because it will be cropped out for the thumbnail. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into resizing the image. I'm going to constrain the proportions so that I just have to change this to 2,000. It's going to automatically give me the height because I've already set the aspect ratio, and I'm going to hit OK. And then we're going to go to Save for Web. And we have a JPEG, and at an 80% quality reduction, we're at a 467.3. I'm just going to double check. The high at a 60% is 236. So I'm going to stick with, that's not what I want. I'm going to stick with the very high. So 80% quality reduction, and more often than not, 80% quality reduction is what I have to do. Over time, like I said, you will learn kind of what your flow is, because again, it depends on how well you're framing the actual image. When you take the photo, how much are you cropping out? Because you're already reducing pixels, which means you're already reducing file size when you crop. Okay, so that's there. Now I want to touch on something else quick here, because a lot of people and other coaches out there will tell you to embed the color profile. Basically, what that means is that the colors that you have in your image will follow with it, right? Problem with this, and it's great when you're printing, you're doing all of that. Problem with this is the standard color profile for the internet is sRGB, which that's what this image will save in. And you do want to have your displays set to sRGB. The issue is phones and computers alike, like my Mac has very similar display features as my iPhone does. You have all these different display options now. There's a bunch of display options that are going to reduce like the white point. Some of them are going to reduce the blue and make your display warmer because it's said to, blue is said to, like, you know, keep you up at night. There's all these different display options, and you have no control over how somebody else has their image or their phone set displays. And the reason I bring this up is because there's some coaches out there that will say, use Photoshop, use Photoshop. It's the only software where you can embed the color profile. It's just not necessary because you have no control over how somebody else is going to set their displays for their phone. So as far as trying to keep control of how your images are displayed color-wise, there's very little that you can really do. Like, you can set your own display settings so that you're editing properly, all of that. That's basically what you can do. But in regards to how some other person is going to view your image, you have no control over how they're using their display and what settings they're using. So it's not an end all be all. I do not recommend using Photoshop solely so that you can embed a color profile. Because at the end of the day, again, you don't know how somebody else has their displays set. So if you are using Photoshop, sure, go ahead and click it. Not a problem. For web. So saving for the web, really the option basically is it's allowing you to do a quality reduction and embed your color profile. That's the biggest portion of save for web versus if I were to go in here and just click save as. So if I go in here and click save as, it does allow me. So I'm embedding color profile here, hit save, and it will give me, oh, sorry, I gotta rename it. Edit. It'll give me an option here to choose quality as well. So you can do either option. Okay, that is in Photoshop. And now I'm going to pull up photos. So this is iPhoto. So I'm just going to take this image here because it's the first one that pulled up. And I'm going to click, if I can get to it, my video's there, edit. And then we're going to do a crop. And over here, and when sometimes you'll see, it can say like 4x5, or it can have the two dots. And the reason that it's showing as a 4:5 aspect ratio here versus a 5:4 is because it's in portrait. So what we're going to do is we're going to click this, and we're actually going to change it to a landscape because that's what we want. And in doing that, it cropped out enough of the image that it's actually probably framed the way that I would have it framed. So we've set that aspect ratio. We could also do a 4:3 if we wanted to. So those are the differences right there between a 4:3 and a 5:4. So remember, it's width times height. You will typically always hear 5:4, whether somebody's doing it in portrait or landscape. But technically speaking, landscape would be a 5:4 and portrait would actually be a 4:5. So they are written that way. So then what we're going to do in iPhoto, so this is just the photo editing software that comes with the Mac. So this is the Mac version. And actually, well, I'll have to double check with the new thing, but you're going to go to export. We're going to export one photo. And typically when you pull this up, it'll say like small. So right here, we got the kind of photo, it's a JPEG. So it's a type of file, JPEG quality. This is our quality reduction. So right now we have it as set to a high, which is probably an 80% quality reduction. I would say 60, and that maximum will be 100%. So we're going to go high. It doesn't tell us. So you'll have to, if you're using the software, you're just gonna have to test it. Color profile is sRGB, which is standard for the web. So then you want to make sure you have that. And then right here, your size is actually going to be your image size. So we're going to do custom. And so we're putting the 2000 again, because we've already set the aspect ratio. You will notice we don't have an option to do the width and height. So we're just setting one dimension. So we're going to set the width to 2000, and it's going to automatically set the height to a 1500. Is that right for 5.4? That might be 4.3. But it's going to automatically set it based on our aspect ratio proportion. Okay, and then it's going to allow me to export it. So that's how you resize in this one. Going to Snapseed. Okay, so when you're inside Snapseed, first thing you're going to see is the tools option. You're going to go to crop. And here it'll allow you to adjust the aspect ratio. So I'm going to change to a 5.4. Looks like it may have been. Yeah, so it was already a 5.4. So if we change it to a 5.3, you can see the little bit that's being cut out. We're going to save that. And if you go to the top little 3 dots in the right-hand corner and go into settings, you're going to see image size at the bottom, and you're going to see format and quality. Okay. So if we choose image size, we're going to set that to 2000 pixels. Now, again, the only reason we're seeing 2000 there is because it's allowing us to change the size of the width, and it's automatically going to change the size of the height because of the aspect ratio that was included in there. And then we're going to go to format and quality, and we're going to save. Let's save as a 95% and see what that looks like. Now, when you go to export in the bottom right-hand corner, to make these settings apply to the image, you have to choose export. Okay. So then we go into our photos and we choose that image. That's not the image. Go to albums. That was my favorite. Sorry. We choose that image that we just saved. Must not have updated. Oh, there it is. Nope. Okay, well, this phone must not be updated. You can tell I haven't touched this phone in a while. Typically, the only time I use this phone is for shooting and or like doing these calls. So right now with the new iOS update, Apple finally has metadata on their iPhone, which is awesome, because before we had to use a third-party app, which I will show you here. Hopefully you guys aren't getting my extra voice. Where is Metafo? Kids probably. Oh, see, now it's reinstalling. I don't know what happened to this phone, but either way, what you would want to do is go into the metadata, which iPhone now allows that. And you would want to see what the file size is and make sure it's under 700 megabytes. If it's not under 700 megabytes, then you'll want to go back in here and change your settings to format and quality of 80%. Like I said, I typically do 80%, but all that's going to depend on how much you're cropping out of your image initially. Have any other questions, just post them into the comments. If you're catching the replay, same, just post them in the comments and I will get back with you. Talk to you guys soon. Please take the time to like this video if you found it useful, and hit that subscribe button if you want to learn more about creating visual content for your handmade business. And if you aren't already a member, make sure you join my free Facebook group, Product Photography for Makers, at productphotographyhelp.com. I'll post a link in the description below this video. Handmade is you.